Hi, I'm Eva Ruiz de Chávez. I'm part of the Guadalajara Film Festival, and it is an honor for us to present Rodrigo Reyes, a director who creates films with an incredible perspective on immigration, crafting a poetic gaze from the margins of Latin and American cultures. Films with striking imagery to portray the contradictory nature of our shared world while revealing the potential for transformative change. 499, who will love to present, won Best Cinematography at Tribeca, as well as a special jury award at Hot Docs. It has been screened at BFI London and the Museum of Other Modern Art in New York. Rodrigo's work has received the support for work in progress of our festival in past editions. Uh, Also from IMCINE, DocsMX, Sundance, and Tribeca Institute. Without much saying, thank you, Rodrigo, so much for having this conversation with us. I know that you're based in Oakland, and we're so happy that we were able to connect with you and to have you here to talk about 499.
Thank you, Eva. It's great to be here. I love your festival. Guadalajara is really special to me, and it's a pleasure to be here.
Well, this movie, it's such a trip, and it's such fresh air for documentary, and it's such an incredible process for a director to create a film so different. I think that you created a convention that is different, where you believe or start thinking that you're going to see a fiction and it has all the rules of fiction. And then all of a sudden you start realizing that this convention is not in the past with a Spanish character, and it's really in the present. And then you start realizing that it's also a documentary. So can you please tell us a little bit more about how you started realizing that you were going to create a convention like this and why?
Well, I wanted to tackle this anniversary, this big anniversary that's probably like the big bang of Mexican history, right? The conquista, the conquest by the Spanish, that we've talked about it for so many years in Mexico in so many different ways. It's a big part of our culture. And I wondered, well, what kind of film can you make about this? I don't want to make an educational film where I'm like teaching people information. I don't want to make an activist film. I want to make a film, something that is like an experience, And we together with producer Inti Cordera, we came up with this idea of people from the past connecting to the present, and what would they say and what would they see. And we realized, this is such a big story. You could talk about all sorts of things. You could do a whole feature movie just about the food in Mexico and its relationship to colonization, for example, right? But what I was most interested in is like this idea of violence. How does violence repeat itself and transform itself to continue being present and continue renovating itself? Our country is sadly in a huge crisis right now, and there's many people who are suffering this violence. And I realized that, in the same road that Cortés took from Veracruz to Mexico City, you could find all of these stories right there, all of these like examples of kind of like an X-ray of the violence in Mexico, and the stories of the survivors who are resisting and asking to be heard. So all of these ingredients were cooking in the same pot, and that's kind of the genesis of the movie. And then when you throw in this character, this conquistador, who's, he's an actor, but he's in the mind of someone from the 16th century, and that just created so many really interesting connections. And I like to think that the movie is a documentary in a very pure sense, because it's documenting like a ghost that exists inside Mexican culture. It's documenting part of our psyche, And all the film did was find an actor and push this character into the screen, you know, but he lives there. Like, we see the conquistador all over our country, right? Like, he's a ghost that exists in our language and our religion, you know, and the movie just like kind of pushed him into the light.
I think following that thought about the ghost, what do you think of slavery as a ghost that transits the collective unconscious? I mean, your character obviously portrays part of that, but like, do you think it's also something that it's our collective unconscious and we still carry it, like your character, that is just still living and moving around in nowadays?
Yes, I think like a lot of these issues are deep traumas that have, if we think of our society as a organic kind of being, that those traumas are very recent, actually. You know, Brazil abolished slavery at the end of the 19th century. The US is still talking about the aftermath of slavery and what it has done to our country here. You know, you can see it. You can see it in Los Angeles. You can see the effect that it continues to have on the Black community. You can see it in Mexico as well, in terms of the practices of oppression and exploitation are very similar in many of these problems to what happened when people were actively enslaved, right? I think it's almost like you could say the technique of violence has changed, but the spirit remains the same. And so when you look at the history of Mexico, there's a sense of a cycle of history that we seem to be trapped in, this idea that like these things just keep happening, right? Like how is it, for example, that 11 women are killed every day in Mexico? Like there's a really brutal story that you saw in the film, and you know, Lorena, the mother of Fatima, and I have become friends, and we talk, you know, we connect with each other, and her story is still there. She's still fighting for justice, and she's now part of a whole community of women who are fighting for justice, and it's just outrageous that this is happening, you know. And it's, in that sense, I hope that, you know, 100 years from now we will look at this period and just be shocked at the what we allowed to happen, the way we look at slavery and think, wow, I can't believe we ever did that. That is so crazy that our communities, our societies allowed that to happen.
Absolutely. I think the story of Lorena is it's a moment in the film that just chills your bones, and it's just sadly the reality for a lot of women nowadays. And I think it's a voice that needs to be heard more and more, because it's a situation that it's so important for us. And it's not only Mexico, but Latin America in general. I think that needs to understand and starts talking about it. I think the things that you need as a society to work on, it's the things that you start mentioning and you put a word on it. I think that America in that respect is much more in tune with the social problems and putting a name on it, and then actually getting to work on it. I think us sometimes as Latin Americans, we don't call it, we don't talk about it, so it doesn't exist. And then when it all of a sudden it strikes you, I think that's why it's so important in films like 499 to deconstruct these subjects, and the subject of violence and death are so imperative and important in the film. And I wanted to talk about that. I like why death being so important and a subject of our culture, and it's a sad present nowadays in our society, are also metaphors that you find in the dying bull in the ring, and the idea of the family searching the earth and scratching to find the remains of those who disappeared. How is that related to America? How is that related to Mexico? Because you, in the film, you go back to San Francisco, and I want to know, like, how do you link this present, this death, this violence nowadays?
Well, I think like the biggest part of addressing this history, our own history, even as people, as a person, if something traumatic happened to you, you need to speak about it. You need to be heard also, and that's why it's so important that the conquistador has to listen. That's what power needs to do. Power needs to learn to listen. If we want to stop this cycle, we want to stop this violence, we need to listen to the voices of the victims. They're the only ones with authority to talk about, the murder of women or the disappearances or indigenous land protections or migration. The people who suffer these issues are the ones who should be speaking. And in the film, the conquistador has to listen. He doesn't want to listen, and that listening process starts to break him, but it doesn't destroy him. And I think like we also need to think about what is it that what how are we connected to that? How is the United States connected to this world of colonization, right? Like we are a land that is built on colonization as well. And that's why the final chapter is called El Dorado, because the Spanish, they thought that the land that is now the United States had like all these secret promises of even more riches and fortunes, where they could just like walk into a city of gold, right? And this idea
Mhm.
that there's just something there for you to take and to make your own, and you're going to become a king, right? This idea is part of the root of the United States, and it's something that we need to talk about and we need to listen. And I think we're in a time where we can see how controversial and revolutionary it is to listen. There's a lot of people who don't want to listen, right? And I think you see it in the election, you see it in the marches happening in Mexico, where the feminists are confronting the president, right? And they're asking, listen to us. They're not wanting to have some sort of like a quiet request. They're demanding that they be heard. And I think we feel that in the air. We feel like this tension, right, of like people wanting to talk about things that are uncomfortable, but they're so urgent. And what's going to happen? Are we going to actually listen and take charge of that conversation? Are we going to participate? Are we going to respect and honor the victims? I don't know what the answer will be, but I think the film kind of shows that process in one character that represents power.
I think that what you're saying uh, ta- talks about how universal this film is, and it's not only necessarily a story that could someone just from Mexico understand, but people from all around the world, because these are universal subjects. Slavery is a universal subject, and it happened all around the world, not just in Latin America or Mexico. Um, and I wonder, like, how is this related to also being an immigrant and also being a foreigner? I would like to tell you a phrase, and you can tell me how does that make you feel. Uh, if I say that a foreigner disrupts society, and that's part of human nature, how does that make you feel?
I mean, that's our role. That's our role as immigrants. We do disrupt societies. We disrupt our world because we left our universe, and now we are combining universes. We're like, and I've it was really hard growing up between Mexico and the US because both countries kind of reject you for being an immigrant. You know, in Mexico, you like abandoned your country, and in the US, it's like, who are you? Like, who do you think you are? And I also grew up around, Prop 187 in California, which was terrible. Like, it was just like, it was legalized racism. And, um, and so, but now that I'm making films, I really appreciate that situation because you never belong, but that being on the outside helps you kind of have new perspectives on both countries, right? And to go back to Mexico and say, I'm not tired of hearing these stories. I want to hear these stories. I want to use my resources from the US and combine them with resources in Mexico, and I want to tell these stories. I want to do something different. And that's why immigrants are valuable, because they stimulate our imagination. They show us that life can be different, you know? Life doesn't have to stay the same. And they also show us what are the things that really matter, because, you know, almost every immigrant that I've ever met loves their home country. They love it. They love it deeply. They send money back. They continue cultural practices. They're always working to preserve certain things, but they also in a way, in a healthy way, they criticize their home country. That, they criticize the things that didn't work, and I think we need to be open to listening to that. It's a very powerful vision, what immigrants go through and what they see, right? And so, like, the classic example I think of is, like, when someone comes with their family here to the US, and they realize, a woman might realize, hey, I can go to court. I came from a really small town where there was nowhere for me to go, to get out of my abusive relationship. But now I've learned that I can go to court here, and they're going to have to provide an interpreter. And then eventually she goes back to Mexico and she tells her friends and her family, hey, I went to court, and now, I changed my world. I took something positive from this trip and this move to the US, and that combination keeps happening all the time in immigrant communities, and it's fascinating, and that, I think, we are the ones that keep, culture moving, because we're the ones who are constantly building new connections.
I love the idea of transition and change. I think language is also something that you kind of touch in some way in your film by talking about the Nahua words that transcended Spanish until today are used. I think, like, many of those words might not sound familiar for a lot of Americans, but maybe avocado, which is a Nahua word, would resonate, and still resonates nowadays worldwide. And I love that little hint of how language changed. And that opens up my next question. Like, I think that you took a lot of care on the words and how you were going to approach the script, and it has a combination, a mix of poetry that I loved. So can you, like, tell us a little bit more about that process?
Yeah, well, the script was years and years of preparation and research. I collaborated with a filmmaker also from Guadalajara, Lorena Padilla, who's a director and screenwriter, and we developed, like, the story arc for the film. And then with editors, Daniel Chavez Ontiveros and Andrea Cignoli, I worked on the writing of the character over and over. We did so many versions of that voiceover to get the exact words, just the right words that you need to hear from this guy, just the right balance of information and story, right? Like, how do you develop the story without telling you everything that happened? during Cortez's time. But I wanted to really see the world from his point of view and to remember with him what happened 500 years ago, so that we had a context and we understood, like, that colonization is messy, that it has all these like really deep conflicts, and that these guys didn't really know, they knew what they were doing in terms of hurting people, but they didn't understand the larger process they were a part of. He didn't understand, like, building like modern capitalism. He didn't understand any of that, but you see it in the film. You see him like remembering and trying to tell the story in a way that makes him look kind of like more a hero or more active than maybe he was. There's like this sense of like he's writing his odyssey, um but in his own memories are also examples of things that he missed, right? And you see that at the very end of the film, where he's remembering that he had some slaves, and a priest from his own country was telling him like, hey, wait a minute, what are you doing? You're really doing something horrible, um, and something deeply unchristian, right? And these are things that he has repressed in his mind. He doesn't want to confront the truth that God wasn't very important. It was all about money. And I think that process for him is really important, because we need to be able to have a dialogue. We can't just say these people are right and these people are wrong. Look at what world we're in right now, right? Like, look at the US. What happens when people stop listening, right? But at the same time, he has to pay the price. He has to go in this journey, and he has to suffer, so that he can gain some sort of new understanding.
And that leads me to my last question. I couldn't help to see in the roles and the credits that you said thank you to your dad, who is a historian, I think. I want to
Yes.
ask that, and if how does that make you question your past and your present, which is something that I can see not only in this film but in your past films, and how is that going to change for your next projects?
So, that's really interesting, and thank you for that question. My dad, he is a historian. He practiced in Mexico, and I'm the oldest, so I got a lot of attention when I was a little kid. And my dad would take me with him on a lot of field trips, trips to El Museo de Antropología, to Teotihuacan, to all these amazing, just World Heritage sites, and he always talked to me about history in this very adult way, like analyzing history and talking about how history is a story that we tell, right? It isn't just the facts that happened. There's a story, there's something that, and somebody's telling that story. And I remember just being at the museo and sitting there and just being fascinated by all this beautiful artwork and all these artifacts from the Mayas and the Aztecs, and and just thinking about just how lucky we were to have this universe, this fascinating Mexican universe. And I think that's kind of the spirit that led me on this film, this love for history. And so I had to thank my dad, because he kind of planted that seed of saying, hey, this is something really fascinating. This is something that you're going to think about, you know and that is just going to follow you and grow with you. So I really appreciate that from my dad. And I wanted to thank him in this film, because I think, like, whenever I was stuck, I would always try to go back to that little kid and think about the things that excited him, when I was a kid. What like, this matters, this is interesting. And so that would help me get through, like, the rough moments of making a film, which is not easy.
No, it's not. And I saw an incredible approach. I'm fascinated with history as well. I'm always like looking back, and I think the past was just better, and I'm one of those crazy period piece buffs. But I just wanna finish this conversation with what is it next for you? What is it something that excites you?
I'm working on a project about a friend of mine. I've been working on it for 10 years, and it's a friend of mine who's an immigrant from Colima, and he's in prison here in the U.S. I'm his friend because I met him in his trial. I was his interpreter at his trial, his murder trial, and so he's in prison, and so we've been working on this movie for like 10 years now of like, how do we tell your story? You're in prison. I can't interview you, but you have all these beautiful memories of your life, of who you are, that nobody knows, because in the trial all we talk about is what happened, like, during 2 minutes of one day, right? And so I've been working on that project for a long time, and I hope to finish it sometime next year, and release it hopefully soon. It's just, the pandemic has slowed everything down, but I'm really, that's a project that is very close to my heart also. And I hope to share it with all of you at FIG in LA very soon.
Yeah, we would love to know the process, and you know that you have a home in our film festival. But thank you so much for giving us this time and for sharing 499 with us. Um, and we'll see each other very soon, hopefully, with your next project.
Thank you. Thank you. It's lovely to speak with you. Thank you so much.